sometimes have wondered why people write their autobiographies. Those whose work lies in the field of imagination have no need to explain their actions or failures, except to themselves.
How do you pronounce your name?
M-A-Z-O, pronounced Mazo. De la Roche rhymes with Foch.
I think Mazo de la Roche was really one of the first Canadian literary celebrities who created this persona in order to protect her private life. The more reclusive one becomes, the greater the public hunger for information about that celebrity.
She was very famous, and she had a big public. She sold a lot of books.
When Jalna was published in 1927, Mazo became a kind of icon in Canadian literature.
She is the first Canadian to have a play in London's West End and went to Broadway. There was a Hollywood movie. There were a number of adaptations based on the Jalna stories. She was immensely popular in France. By the time she died, 11 million copies of her books had been sold in 93 languages.
Her own life became yet another fiction. And in many ways, this only fed the fascination and the mystery of Mazo de la Roche.
Your novel, Jalna, has made you world famous, and yet you remain a mystery. What can you tell us about yourself?
Everything I am, I have put into my books.
How well did I know Mazo? I was never part of her life, really. She never felt like a mother to me. I don't know whether she was actually conscious of it, but she lived in a fantasy world with all the characters that she created. Jalna made her famous in 1927, and she's been famous for Jalna ever since.
Jalna looked very mellow in the golden sunlight, draped in its mantle of reddening Virginia creeper and surrounded by freshly clipped lawns.
You fill it to the brim, fill it to overflowing. I can carry my wine.
Countless suns had shone through the shutters on Whiteoaks, eating heartily as they ate today, talking loudly, disagreeing.
Then what was I making such a scene about?
Oh, he was splendid.
What crops should be sown that year? Which of Grandmother's sons had made the worst mess of his life?
A health, Gran, is to us. Who's like us?
to all the Whiteoaks.
The Whiteoaks. The Whiteoaks.
Thus, the Whiteoaks at table.
The Whiteoak family are real old blue-blooded Ontarians, which greatly appealed to Mazo. They had a 1,000-acre estate, and they presided over this in very much the vision of the squirearchy of an English country house. Mazo knew how to draw a reader into that world because the Whiteoaks are kind of larger than life.
From the very first, the characters created themselves. They leapt from my imagination and from memories of my own family. The grandmother, Adeline Whiteoak, refused to remain a minor character.
Your son.
Be quiet, Granny.
Be quiet yourself. You'd like to be a tyrant like my father. He cowed every one of his children except me.
The grandmother in the Jalna novels had economic power. So the plot revolves around the grandmother and her plans for the dynasty.
Marvelous old girl. Not one of us will ever equal her. To think she's 101, eh?
Well, she's bound to go soon.
No, I hope you're wrong. Home wouldn't be the same without her. She's the heart and soul of Jalna.
I wonder who'll get her money.
You're always talking about her money.
The rest of you are always thinking about it.
In a chance copy of the Atlantic Monthly, I came upon the notice of a competition for the most interesting novel by any author from any part of the world. The prize was large. When I wrote the name Jalna at the top of the manuscript, it never entered my head that one day it would become well known to quite a number of people.
In 1927, Toronto had a population of around 300,000. It was not the kind of metropolis that London or Paris or New York were. It was, by all accounts, a provincial backwater. When the Atlantic Monthly prize of $10,000 was awarded to Jalna, it was highly unusual for a woman to win such a literary honor, but it was also seen as a breakthrough for Canadian literature.
The first Canadian author to crash through with something big in years.
Mazo was like F. Scott Fitzgerald's Jay Gatsby, who basically went from rags to riches. I mean, Mazo really went from rags to riches.
Winning the Atlantic Prize at that point in 1927 would have been akin to an author winning the Booker Prize today, or being suddenly chosen as an Oprah author. The prize really changed Mazo de la Roche from someone who had been steadily publishing novels with a very small readership to an international publishing success.
The feeling of goodwill toward me was universal. Even critics who had not been kind to my books joined in the praise. The general feeling seemed to be that of rejoicing that a Canadian had achieved distinction in the United States, a country which heretofore could scarcely have shown less interest in Canadian letters.
We just take for granted now that Margaret Atwood can have a career, a fabulous career. Then there weren't Margaret Atwoods around, and Mazo was about the closest thing to it. Obviously, Lucy Maud Montgomery, the author of the Anne books, was phenomenally successful, but she's working in the field of children's books, whereas Mazo is writing for adults. People were ringing her doorbell, and aspiring authors were bringing their manuscripts and staying till all hours. She was very famous, and people could be intrusive. She had to protect herself.
Miss Deborah, Miss who is Caroline Clement? Do you have any favorite foods? Do you have any hobbies?
Hobbies?
Any interests besides writing?
Yes. Privacy. I think you have an idea how much Caroline is to me, though I usually try to conceal how perfect I think she is. As a matter of fact, she is my sister by adoption, my cousin in reality. And beside all her tender qualities, she is the backbone of my work. I owe her more than I could ever express.
She lived with her friend, Miss Clement, and nobody exclaimed about that because a lot of ladies lived with a companion at that time. But mostly they lived with a companion of a lower social class, which wasn't the case with Mazo. They were ladies, Mazo and Miss Clement, two ladies. And they would have afternoon tea and things like that.
Mazo had what used to be called a Boston marriage with her adopted sister, and that's a kind of old-fashioned term. It described two women who lived together and had a very passionate female friendship.
I think the term Boston marriage was invented by Henry James in the writing of the Bostonian. Here, I think it must have been the only way Mazo La Roche could find this enormous time she needed to write, to find a companion who was already working with her soul.
Caroline made Mazo what she was in many ways, allowed her to fulfill herself. She was Mazo's supporter, financially, psychologically. She became the other half of an amazing writing machine also.
Caroline had worked for the Ontario Civil Service and was a very good typist. The success of Jalna allowed her to leave that job, and then the roles reversed. Then Mazo began in the role of breadwinner.
Caroline was engaged for many years to a man called Harry Mumford. I remember saying to Caroline once, "Do you think you should have married him?" And she said, "If I had broken with Mazo, she would never have written another word."
Caroline looked after the running of the house and the meals and all those mundane things. I don't think Mazo could have coped with the world without Caroline because they had been brought up together as sisters. So they were very much a part of each other's lives.
When a questionnaire came for use in publicity, Caroline filled in the form as best she could, with only a few mistakes.
Birthplace. Uncertain.
They left out details and combined some things, partly because it was more interesting.
Date. Also uncertain.
Mazo enjoyed privacy, but she enjoyed putting people on, too, particularly newspaper people and people that asked her questions that she thought were not worth much. Even her autobiography, a lot of it was make-believe.
Her autobiography, Ringing the Changes, it's fascinating for what it doesn't say. What interested her wasn't sharing with the readers the facts of her own life. It was the game of keeping her life from her readership. It's very difficult to situate Mazo chronologically. partly because of all these deceptions, I believe that Mazo was born in 1879.
She grew up in Newmarket, in Mazo's grandparents' home.
She'd gone from one house to another. She often lived with her grandparents.
Her mother had been so sickly all the time in bed. Her father was a kind of ne'er-do-well, drifting from job to job.
Mazo's father at one point was a traveling salesman. She became really close to her father because, of course, her mother was always ill. You really feel at this time how claustrophobic her domestic environment has become. He's got the free life, but the mother is the oppressive life of domesticity that Mazo clearly associated with being a woman.
Her father had died in 1915, bankrupt, and left them virtually nothing.
Mazo created a persona for herself that allowed her to transcend growing up in very different socioeconomic circumstances than her later life suggested. Maisie Roche, as she was called, was a very different person than Mazo de la Roche.
I should be reluctant to give the impression that I had an unhappy childhood, one to be endured. I was a happy and cherished child, though my mother's illness overshadowed part of it. More and more often, she remained in bed. She was so ill that the atmosphere of her condition permeated the household. It was as though doom hung over us. Before Caroline arrived, I was a lonely, only child. Although I did not realize it at the time, or for many years afterward, that January day was the most important day of my life. My Uncle George was carrying a large bundle. The climax was a small girl. She looked as though she would never smile. Never before had I had a child in the house with me. A delicious intimacy was there between us in that chill upstairs, with the grown-ups far below. A wild happiness possessed me. Before long, I began to write plays for Caroline and me. Almost always, Caroline was the heroine, and I the hero. Such was the fantastical double life lived by Caroline and me. The outside world became unreal. The vivid reality was our play.
She can ride anything.
Yes, so I see.
In the Jalna novels, Mazo is very interested in passion and how that got expressed. Rennie is very swashbuckling. He's the kind of hero of the household. I suspect that Mazo was thinking of herself here, but she made the character a male because that would be more acceptable. Elaine Archer is the love interest for Rennie, but for Rennie to love her, his brother's wife, that's absolutely forbidden.
Elaine Archer is very much modeled on Caroline. The coolness of her character, the physical appearance, the blonde hair.
Rennie appeals to me partly because he is someone for whom I have understanding and sympathy. Never have I been completely at one with any female characters of mine. I might love them, suffer with them, but they were they, and I was I.
Good having you here. You fitted in. You're a part of Jalna.
Oh, Rennie. That's sweet. I mean it.
The next moment, Elaine found herself in Rennie's arms with his lips against hers and all her sensations crushed into helpless surrender. She felt the steady thud of his heart and against it the wild tapping of her own. At last, he released her.
Oh.
She exclaimed quiveringly.
How could you do that? How could you think that I would be willing?
I didn't think at all. I did it on the spur of the moment. You looked so... Oh, I can't think of a word to describe how you looked.
Please tell me. I wish to know.
Well, inviting, then. With a stab of almost physical pain, she remembered that she had half unconsciously kissed him back. With a little gasp, she said,
Of the two, I am the more to blame.
Oh, my dear, you are a sweet thing. And to think that you are Eden's wife, and that I must never kiss you again.
I think Mazo was writing about taboos and trying to do it in a way that didn't draw attention to that fact.
With Mazo, you have the kind of conventional plot, and then you have the submerged plot. And the submerged plot is what makes those texts so fascinating, and it is what tells us so much about Mazo.
Our ideas were very advanced, much more than anyone around. Mazo de la Roche is very secretive, but at the same time, if you read very attentively, it's all there.
It was not in me to be the sort of female who knows no boredom, no fatigue, so long as she can trail after the man she fancies. An attempt at hand-holding, a hand stealing toward my waist, was enough to make me fiercely withdraw. There were incipient affairs of the heart, though I retained a dislike of being touched. I looked on sex as rather silly. There was so much that was more interesting. I always wished I were a boy. My early books were very much appreciated by critics in England. They thought I was Mr. Mazo de la Roche. They detected a masculine point of view, perhaps because I did not write with the failings of my sex. That spring, I wrote the first chapters of Whiteoak, a sequel to Jalna. I had found them an interesting, a colorful family. Their doings had fascinated me. Now they possessed me. Finch. Finch was my alter ego. I was one with Finch, for he and I had much in common.
In the novel, Finch is the artist who is having a very hard time figuring out how to be himself and to be a member of this tribe.
If you were mine, I'd sober you. I'm not yours. I'm not anybody's. You talk as though I were a dog. I wouldn't insult a dog.
The scene in which Finch is bullied by his brothers is pivotal, I think, to our understanding of Mazo.
What's this? Read this, Rennie.
Dearest Finch, After you were gone last night, I was very much disturbed. It would be a terrible thing if the clarity of our relationship were clouded. Write to me, darling Finch. Yours ever, Arthur.
I'm disgusted with you.
I don't understand.
Do you know what this sort of thing leads to? I'd rather you were dead than to find you carrying around a sloppy letter like this.
And when the two brothers are handed this note, they become totally derisive of Finch and actually refer to Arthur as a rotter, which to me is a kind of encoded word for that time for homosexual.
Finch could not defend himself. He felt annihilated. Sobs shook his lips. Tears ran down his cheek unheeded. He was an outcast in his own home, unspeakably alone. He asked himself the old question. What am I?
It seemed as though when she was creating the character of Finch, it was too painful. She was going down into her own unconscious and her own memories.
Finch, Whiteoak, was probably close to Mazo de la Roche in the sense that he could go from the extremes of happiness, joy, and also seeing himself a failure.
He could endure his life no longer. He was not afraid. He embraced the gently heaving water. Slowly he relaxed and surrendered himself.
There's a kind of recurrence through Finch of extreme bouts of depression. This is Mazo reliving her own past.
Sometimes I am inclined to make fun of modern psychologists with their pat jargon. Yet I suppose if an understanding doctor had been brought in, he might have helped me. That winter, I had expected to do much work on my new novel, Whiteoaks. Instead, I spent 6 weeks or more in acute suffering from pain in the head. Several times I went to the hospital for electrical treatments. I cannot remember how many. Pain dulled my memory. But I do remember that after each treatment, I was worse. I felt myself to be almost an outcast from the normal world.
When are we going to have a sequel to Jalna?
Your readers are hungry for more.
Where's the sequel?
She was getting very nervous and afraid that she wouldn't be able to complete Whiteoaks of Jalna, the immediate sequel to Jalna.
The demands on me did not lessen. Invitations, requests to speak, letters, interviewers came from newspapers. Is Caroline still with me, you ask? Still with me? Do I breathe? Do I live? Have I not made away with myself? Yes, she is still with me. If Jalna had given us independence, just as certainly it had stolen our privacy. We made up our minds that there was nothing for it but to go away somewhere and hide.
in the fall of 1928, she and Carolyn went to a trail cottage near Toronto. She was trying to work on Whiteoaks of Jalna, having some difficulty.
Few realize, I am sure, just how heavy a physical tax it is upon an author to write a substantial book. It draws heavily indeed upon all of one's bodily resources. Only a writer who has suffered an attack of nerves, such as I had passed through, can quite understand the effort of beginning, the tremendous eagerness to put down the first words. I knew what I wanted to write. The words were at my hand, but could I write them?
She couldn't write. She had writer's block. Carolyn stepped in and became her amanuensis, but clearly was much more than a secretary, because Mazo records that at first she could only write one word, and then she could write a couple words. And finally, when she was able to write a page or 2 pages, she would take them to Caroline, and Caroline could create 3 or 4. You can see the holographs and see that as of 1928, it's pretty well divided between Mazo and Caroline.
To have that degree of understanding and intimacy is remarkable, absolutely remarkable.
Caroline was the only one to whom I could have dictated. It gave me confidence in myself. No longer did I think, how much shall I write today? Shall I suffer for it? Now, in the stillness of our woodland, we were enamored of life, of the drifting, mysterious atmosphere of the autumn, the cold, frosty nights, the golden days. At last, in early October, the novel was finished. I was triumphant.
After very successful sales of Whiteoaks of Jalna, Mazo and Carolyn went to Europe for an extended holiday. Then they settled in England for about 10 years.
She was far more popular and well-known in England than she ever was here, and she was more accepted.
I think that once she became extremely successful, Mazo de la Roche did, in a sense, create another fiction that she could inhabit. Maisie Roche created a lifestyle that, in her view, was befitting of Mazo de la Roche.
They seem to have felt they had a hole in their lives, a gap of some kind, because they suddenly adopted 2 children, a girl and an infant boy, Esme and Renee.
I believe we were adopted in 1932. I was probably 3. And then Rennie, of course, was 1.5 years younger. So he was just a baby. Caroline was Auntie Cara. And Mazo was Mummy.
Because of bereavement and adversity, 2 lovely infants came to us. It was a tremendous responsibility, yet I shouldered it without undue consideration. Infant innocence was now mine to protect, to nourish beneath a maternal wing. As for Caroline, There never was a more generous and loving aunt.
Mazo said different things to different people as to who the parents of the children were. She said they were friends, that they had died, and sometimes they had died in a car accident. Sometimes they died of, I think, of tuberculosis. She was hiding.
As far as her adoption of two children is concerned, there are all kinds of stories, explanations, the most common being her connection to the Macmillans. Daniel Macmillan of publishing was instrumental in arranging for that adoption, that it couldn't have been effected at that time for two women to adopt children without some help from very high up.
I understand that she did have help because by law, a single woman couldn't adopt children, much less two.
I had the impression, and it was only an impression, that Renee was Mazo's natural child. There's so much that was so in Renee that was so much like Mazo. I can't account for the age. She must have been 51 or 2. I don't know.
Like many another brother and sister, they were very unlike. Her eyes were grayish-blue, his eyes brown and brilliant. Yet it was in disposition that they most differed, for she was lively, a little overbearing and not demonstrative in affection, while already, in his baby way, he showed a gentleness and a desire to express his goodwill.
Well, I think she was a little more interested in Rennie, partly because he was a boy, and he was more interested in her, I guess. He looked up to Mazo a great deal, where I didn't. When we were younger, of course, we'd be on show for about an hour, and that's when we had our playtime. Mazo would make up things for us to do, and the naughtier they were, the more she enjoyed it, and then we got prizes, imaginary, of course, for all these wicked deeds that we did. We were all right as very young children, but then when we became human beings, other than children, she wasn't interested. The adoption was never discussed. It was sort of an unwritten code that she didn't bring the subject up.
Renee wanted to know the facts behind his birth, and he said, you know, I asked her and asked her. I said, Auntie Cara, please tell me, what is the secret of my birth? I must know that. And Caroline's answer was, I promised Mazo I would never tell. And I think it did a great deal to break Renee's heart. He was 52, he died at a young age.
They went to their graves, not really ever telling us what the whole story was.
This is how much those children were kept in the dark. So if the children were kept in the dark, what hope have we for ever unraveling that mystery?
If Mazo de la Roche would have been in the Bohemian society of Europe of that time, she would probably have been a very different person. It was the first season of feminist writings, in a way. All these wonderful ladies, women writers and artists, Vita Sackville-West, Natalie Barney, Romaine Brooks, they were collectively creative. They were very strong personalities without fears, and they went on in a collective way to cut all taboos. But I think Mazo de la Roche is more restrained, even in her writing.
Virginia Woolf, and Bloomsbury, they were all upper middle class, well-educated. Mazo didn't have that solace of having a bohemian community the way, a Virginia Woolf would have in Bloomsbury. I mean, she was isolated in her difference.
When you read Radcliffe Hall, she is also in her childhood, she's also very alone, like Mazo de la Roche was. Imagine how she felt, how she must have felt in such a cold landscape in our own country.
If you point out women who came out, like Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas, they didn't have Mazo's history to deal with. They didn't have a small town in Ontario to deal with.
There were rumors that they were lesbians. I never believed the rumors. I am so certain that they were not lesbian.
I know people did allude to it occasionally and so on, and I just ignore it. Because I thought, well, if you want to believe that, go ahead and believe it. You're not going to listen to me anyway.
It's an era in which, at the time, it would have been quite destructive. Nowadays, I suppose people don't think anything of it.
There were always people who would say sneaky things because they would say, she's living with this woman.
What are they going to say? Are they going to stand at the door of Ava Crescent and say, guess what? I just want to give you this bit of news. We are heterosexuals in this house. I mean, it's quite nonsensical. But I do feel that unless anybody is absolutely certain, and no one is, I might add, that it's an impossibility to simply make a statement.
The most important thing is her work. Whatever she was, I think she deserves the greatest respect.
When Mazo wrote Jalna books, when she produced one Jalna book after another, it was almost a guaranteed money machine.
Jalna was so wildly popular, it may have been a curse, because she went on to write the 16 Jalna Chronicles.
There were the rumors that publishing hacks, that basically ghostwriters, were producing all of these Jalna novels, and that, in fact, there was no Mazo de la Roche at the center of this publishing phenomenon.
Critics from a very early stage questioned, haven't we had enough Jalna novels?
She did start grinding them out. There is an element of soap opera.
She wrote about what were traditionally considered women's topics, like love, like sexual passion, like marriage. I imagine that attitude had a lot to do with keeping Mazo's work from being passed on to the next generation.
Many people who are interested in Canadian literature have forgotten her name. She received some horrific literary reviews toward the end of her life. She was very much ridiculed.
I don't think Canada's been less kind to a writer than Mazo.
I could not deny the demands of readers who wanted more of that family. Still less could I deny the urge within myself to write them. The novelist, like the actor, must remember his audience. Without an audience, where is he? Without those characters, I was lost.
I think readers of today could rediscover her as they could rediscover the works of Emily Bronte or Jane Austen, people who have been describing the realities of their times in a very personal way.
She published in her lifetime 37 books, not just the Jalna novels, but also short stories, children's books, nonfiction. If you cut her out of the collective memory, you lose a big part of the Canadian identity. And you lose a very extraordinary and prolific writer.
Mazo laid out a kind of map for women who wanted to write. She also subtly and cleverly gave permission in her story about women's right to have their own lives. She's kind of our missing link, and we need to put that link back in her rightful place.
For Mazo, I would certainly say her writing and the development of a book was certainly the most important for her, because that's what she lived for.
I remember in the last months of Mazo's life, I would drop in and she would have her two hands up like this, coated in paraffin. She had absolute agony with rheumatoid arthritis. If she wasn't with the paraffin, she had her pad of paper and a pencil between these two fingers. And with this hand, she would be pushing the pencil to write. Such was the compulsion to write.
When you look at a life, what is the truth? How can we ever know the truth? How can we ever pretend to know the truth? Especially with somebody like Mazo. The fascination of Mazo is that we'll never know the truth.
Each person comes to the story of Mazo de la Roche and Caroline Clement with their own background, biases, etc.
Only a few people ever know anything about love. To the rest of them, they marry, bring up their children, and die. What they call love is nothing more than a habit. Real love is tremendous. Tremendous in its power, tremendous in its force. It is a terrible thing that seizes you in its grip. It is utterly useless to blame people for what they do under its impetus. Love throbs into life within you. It overpowers your senses. Your being is aflame with it. It is of such love that I have written in Jalna.
Mr. LaRoche, one last question. What do you think your public should know in order to understand you and your books better?
I think they already know more than they have any business to.